Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rebecca Annand. I'm the Managing Partner of Infinite Learning. A very warm welcome to today's webinar. We're delighted to be running this in partnership with Sarah Pavey. Sarah is here today to talk about how can we trust online information and virtual learning, and how can you use your library services with impact. Obviously, students and teachers and the whole world over is using online learning in a way that's never really been seen before. So it's certainly a very topical topic that we're going to be looking at today. So the content of the courses that Sarah is going to be sharing with us is really looking at virtual distance learning gains, obviously more prominence at the moment, and we need to ensure that students are equipped to handle and understand information independently. Sarah will also be looking at how such skills are vital for lifelong learning as a global citizen. We'll be looking at the differences between online and face-to-face delivery in gaining trust. And we're also going to be looking at the changing role of the school librarian in this context and how it can lend valuable support even when there might be physical constraints, which we know libraries are not being used in the same way as they normally are in schools at the moment. Now, before I hand over to Sarah, just a couple of areas of housekeeping from me. All attendees are automatically on listen-only mode and cameras are off. And we'll allow Sarah to present her PowerPoint to you in full. I think it's about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So if you've got any questions as we go through, anything that Sarah mentioned, oh, I'd like to ask a question at that, do put that in the chat area as we go along. And we'll do a live question and answer session with Sarah towards the end. Questions that sometimes come in during the webinar of a more sort of logistical nature are, will we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Will we get a certificate? Will there be a recording of the video available? And the answer to all those questions is yes, there will. Immediately after the webinar, we will send you a follow-up email with details of the PowerPoint and details of the courses that Sarah is running with us, about which she's going to talk today. And then tomorrow at 5 o'clock, you will receive directly from GoToWebinar a link to the video recording. Okay, so without further ado, Sarah, it's a pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hello, everybody, and hello afternoon to all those people in Dubai. Hello, good midday to all those people in the UK. And for anyone else around other parts of the world, hello, whatever time zone you're in. Welcome to my short webinar, and I'm going to be really explaining a little bit about the courses that I'm going to be running for Infinite Learning. And also I want to use this webinar so you get a little bit of an idea about my presentation style as well. My courses tend to be quite interactive, and I'll delve into that a little bit later. So the first thing I want to do is just to tell you a little bit about me. I've worked in all sorts of different schools, independent schools, state schools, international schools for over 20 years. And I've always done training as a sideline for external customers. But about 5 years ago, I thought, oh, I had an opportunity really to go freelance. And so that's what I did. And I have to say, I haven't looked back. I love it. It's a really good blend. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is this huge amount of information that we've actually now got at our fingertips, literally, and all the different formats that are there. And I've kind of written books about this. I've delivered lectures. I've been to conferences and presented on all of this, as well as training courses. And I think it is such an important thing. Many years ago, when I was doing my master's in information science, somebody said to me, do you know, at the moment, we're living in the world of IT. And at the moment, the T is the main dominant factor. But do you know, in a few years hence, maybe 20 years or so, for projecting forward, it's going to be the I part, the information, that is going to be so important. And I think, you know, we have arrived at that point right now. And whatever kind of literacy we choose to call it, I think there's a lot of confusion over the terminology. But whatever we call it, whether we call it information literacy, digital literacy, media literacy, it really is saying that we want our young students to develop into critical thinkers and problem solvers. And most importantly, I believe that we not only need to teach them to spot things like fake news, but we should also be teaching them the moral responsibility between the creation of information. So whenever they write or whenever they post something or wherever they make a website or a video, they need to be mindful of where that's going and the responsibility that that holds. So with that kind of in mind, I've developed 2 courses. Usually I'll go out to Dubai, so I'm a bit gutted that I can't actually go out there for my sunshine this year, but hopefully next year. But I'm going to be running 2, and the first one is really appealing to not just librarians but teachers as well, or anybody who's interested if they work in the education field, about actually helping students navigate this whole online world. So it's called, the catchy little title of Combating the Fake Online World, Debunking the Moral Panics and Applying Constructive Use of New Media. That's quite a mouthful, but really what it means is really looking at this whole concept of online information and how we can help people through that minefield. The second course that I'm running, so that's running on the 10th of November, 10th and 11th. And then I'm also running one which is more geared at school librarians the following week. And that's really designed to get people thinking about how, as a librarian, you can support this kind of learning in this blended learning or this online learning. So the idea of these courses is that they're going to actually run over 2 days. There's going to be 2 hours each day, as you can see here, starting at 1 o'clock in Dubai or 9 o'clock if you're in the UK. And the idea is that we will be exploring these topics, and then overnight there will be a short exercise that I'll get you all to complete, and the second day will start with some feedback, because I feel in all of these courses that it's really important to get some practical experience, and this is a good way to actually get you to think about the kinds of information that you might need to put into a project or a lesson that you're designing. I think that's really, really essential. So let's have a look and just see what we're going to do today in this little webinar. It's really going to be about showing you how the courses are going to help you learn about the importance of embedding lifelong learning skills, because I feel these are really important as part of global citizenship. And partly also, I like the idea of exploring the UN's sustainable goals, because learning should not just be for the sake of it, but learning should really have some what's in it for me factor, whether that's at a local level or whether that's at a more global level. And if we want a peaceful future world, then it's essential that we show people how learning helps them care for the planet and the people that actually live in it. So we're going to be looking at why this is important, this lifelong learning. It's also because we've been thrust into this sudden online learning world, or a blended learning. I was talking to Rebecca earlier, and she said, you know, her husband, he's trying to juggle a physical class, an online class, and then an independent learning class at the same time. That's an awful lot of work that has to be actually coordinated and managed. And I think people don't realise that this is quite a new area for a lot of people, and you can't just suddenly do it. It's like learning a musical instrument. You don't suddenly give someone a musical instrument and expect them to play it. You've got to learn how to do it. And so we need to teach children how to actually develop independent learning skills and how to cope with a virtual learning environment. But there's something else that I wanted to actually address today. I mean, the courses are going to be looking at the authenticity of online information, But what about how we actually ensure trust and engagement when we're delivering something in a virtual scenario? And that's something which, again, has possibly been overlooked because of the speed at which all of this has been introduced. So we're going to actually be looking at that as well. And finally, I just want to address today how all of this fits in with the librarian in your school and the library and the support that that can give. Because I think this is, again, one of the reasons why I need to have a separate course for the librarian role is because how much it has been changing recently. And, you know, people are going to need to be able to pick apart, to learn about how to trust information and so on. And that's why this needs a class for librarians, a training course for librarians, to show them how this can be achieved. So I want to start with this slide. I love this slide because this actually shows us the future, or at least a projected future. And if we look at this, it looks at how employment has changed. And I would argue that although this is employment, really what this is showing you is the kinds of skills that are going to be needed in the future. The top dark blue line shows the employment for people who do non-routine cognitive work. This is the kind of work that requires problem solving. It requires creativity and thinking outside the box. It's not something that can easily be replicated by a machine. What you'll notice is that that red line, the one that's dipping there, is the routine cognitive. And this is because artificial intelligence is now getting so good that it can actually do most of that routine thinking for you. And I was at a lecture the other day, and there was a professor from Brighton University who was talking about drones that you can actually control by your mind now. That's amazing, isn't it? So you don't even have to have buttons. You can just think what you want it to do. So if we apply that to education, education has been very behind, really, in adopting a lot of these online artificial intelligence processes. One of the problems is that we are fairly rooted in a curriculum that is still based upon factual learning, when in fact employers in higher education are looking more for people who can take those facts and do something creative with them. And that's the difference between the dark blue line and the red line. The other ones, the manual jobs, interestingly, that yellow line is fairly static, in fact, actually slightly rising. And those are the sorts of jobs that computers just aren't clever enough to do yet. So that's why that's fairly static. And but you'll notice that the level of employment on the yellow line is really quite low. So unless your students have definitely got a definite route into the non-routine manual because their parents or somebody owns a firm that only specialises in that, then you know you're less likely to be getting a job in that. So we want to prepare people for the future. We want to prepare them for that world of work, and we need to be travelling along that blue line. But it's changed, hasn't it? The world has changed. And we started off with this. It was a pile of books. And education consisted of looking at your pile of books, learning the information that was in the pile of books, and then the people that had written the pile of books would set you an exam, and you would take the exam. And if you passed, well, then you were on to the next part of your education. So things have changed because from the pile of books, we have now got all these different things that we can look at for our information. And our information sources come from all sorts of different things, like websites we'll be looking at, search engines, different ways of getting to those websites. Social media, huge increase over the last few years. Then we're looking at video content, apps on our phones, on our tablets, gaming that can actually teach us things through the whole idea of social gaming, just design of projects, databases that are specific for particular topics. Print resources are probably about the last thing now that some of our students will consider before they've gone through all that, the rest of the gamut of information sources. So How does this work in practice? Well, this is another little graph here, and I think this just shows the literally the amount of information that's out there. This was actually taken from data in 2019 to project for 2020. We're now nearly at 2021, and you can see over on this side the little grey icon over there, which shows you the previous years, and you can see how things have changed exponentially since that time. Things like social media, Twitter is still huge, and Facebook, despite the fact we're constantly told that Facebook is now for old people, it is still growing at quite a long rate. And YouTube is hugely expanded. Well, if you're like me, I don't bother looking at an instruction manual anymore. I just go to YouTube and see if there's a video on it, because it's a lot easier to watch that and a lot easier on the brain, I find. But this is kind of the extent. And if you imagine, I've been talking about this slide now for probably nearly a minute. So this is what has happened since I showed you the beginning of this slide. 500 new YouTube videos. This is a phenomenal amount of information. How do we get people to cope with it? By 2025, it's estimated that the world's data will have grown to 175 zettabytes. And this is a ginormous number. Basically, it's the equivalent, just 1 zettabyte is 36,000 years of high definition video to watch. So you can see the issue. We've got to be discerning. We've got to decide what we choose to do. It's almost like in a poker game. Do we decide to hold or do we decide to play? We've got to think tactically when we're dealing with information. The other point that's on here, which I think is probably already out of date, is that the average person will have 5,000 digital interactions per day, up from about the 800 that we were doing, I still suspect, before the lockdown. So 5,000 digital interactions every day with your computer or some other smart device around your home. So this includes all sorts of other different things. Sorry about that. So there are all sorts of different, devices out there that we can tell our houses to switch on the lights, to switch on the heating, and so on, while we're nowhere near home. We can do it remotely. We can watch digital camera footage around the place as well. My daughter's got a digital camera where she watches her cat to make sure it's not destroying the house while they're out at work all day. So, there are all these different things that we can do. And I'm sure everybody's got a thing which they shout at to give them the weather forecast or train times and things like that. So artificial intelligence is growing, the Internet of Things is growing, and we're going to have to show people how they can cope with this. Then COVID struck, global panic. It's been everywhere, hasn't it? And it's had an amazing effect on the use of the Internet. We know that nearly more than half the world is already connected to the Internet, but 346 million new users have actually come online in the last 12 months, and most of them through the COVID crisis. This little chart, one of the things that I think is most interesting in it is down at the bottom, third from the left at the bottom. You can see there that it's actually got the creating and uploading videos has increased 16%. That's a load of information that has now come online. So that YouTube chart that we looked at in the previous slide, if that is the case and it's 16% more than the average, that's going to be a hell of a lot more information out there that we've got to get our children to get their heads around. And when we consider that teachers doing all their online lessons and making games, making information packs for their students, all of that is contributing to that information pool. So I'd argue that it's going to be a lot higher now than perhaps we even thought of. And then there's all the leisure time products as well. So let's have a look at this, because with the course that I'm going to be running on this, I want to really consider how, with all of this information, not all of it will be trustworthy. So how do we combat the disinformation that might be being projected out there and published. How do we become more media literate when we read news? We know, and I attended an Ofcom meeting fairly recently, we know that the majority of students are probably gaining their information regarding news, not via conventional television and radio, but they are probably doing it through social media. And one of the interesting things about social media that they were arguing was the fact that when you use social media, it's you as a person that are being selective. So you're choosing where you're going to get your information from. And the problem is that there is a kind of confirmation bias going on here, because you're probably the people that you integrate with social media and interact with are the people that are going to hold the same views as you. So therefore, it kind of detracts a little bit from the media literacy. We might just only be getting one side of the picture. And we need to show students how to become discerning about information, how to make sure that they are getting a balanced viewpoint upon which they can make their own decisions about what's trustworthy. We also want to see how we can embed digital literacy within the lessons that we already put out there, because we can't have completely dedicated lessons just to this topic, I don't feel. It works much better when it's actually there within a practical example. So one of the things on the course that we'll be doing is looking at some standard theoretical digital literacy toolkits and seeing how we can apply them to a real life lesson that we might want to teach. And it's also this whole idea of citizenship. We know that some in the English curriculum, there is some information about learning about handling information and media literacy within the citizenship curriculum. And there's also a little bit within the IT curriculum. But this differs depending on what curriculum you're following around the world. And again, whether it's a discrete teaching or whether it's embedded, my feeling is that it's better if it's part of the general teaching, because we all know from students, as soon as you start putting things in boxes, they're not going to look outside that box for anything else. They just think, oh, tick, done citizenship, I can move on to the next thing. So it's really important that we look at how this kind of information is delivered so that it has impact and purpose. And we need to show them best practice. It's not just about telling them when things are wrong. I think it is so important to tell them about best practice and what they should be doing. When we're actually getting them to do a lesson, quite often we model what we want them to see, what's an exemplar of good work. And this is what I feel we should be doing with information. We need to show them good examples of information, not just spotting the bad. So, as I said, you know, since the lockdown in March and since the COVID really beginning for some countries as early as January and February, we've had to take a huge digital leap. And this has been for both staff and students. And we've had to suddenly come on board learning new ways of teaching and maybe adopting a blended learning approach over the last few months. And it's been quite a shock, and there's been quite a few challenges. And Jane Secker from City University and myself, we actually conducted a little survey amongst some librarians, some FE and higher education librarians, anybody who was teaching information literacy to students, to see what challenges they'd faced. And talking to some teaching colleagues in other areas as well, I think these are fairly common as well. Firstly, there is this whole issue of how do we know that the students are actually engaged with the lesson that we're delivering? Just like me at the moment, I can't see any of you, but I'm trusting that you are there and that you are listening to what I've actually got to say. The trouble is that sometimes teachers are thinking, oh, I bet they're playing with something underneath the radar that I can't see. And, you know, if that trust isn't there, then that can affect engagement, as I'm going to show you. There's all the technical difficulties, not just in actually running the seminar, but all the things we don't know what the person at the other end of the line has got in terms of their technology, in terms of their ability to connect. Is their broadband width big enough to cope with this? We don't know. Have they just got a wind-up Wi-Fi system? We've got no idea. And then we just need time, don't we? You know, the new techniques, the time to actually manage, you know, how we conduct a lesson and so on. We just don't know that, how that actually works. So there's all of that we've got to consider as well. Then there's the issue of the digital literacy. We don't know how well students are going to be able to cope with actually learning online as opposed to in the classroom. Can they actually cope with that distance? Can they learn? Do they know how to use the tools and so on? So maybe we need to spend time teaching them the tools, which again takes time out of teaching them what we want them to know from a subject point of view. Also, when we're at home, there is that awful problem of balancing work with the other stuff that goes on at home, you know, like putting your washing on, having meals and so on. It's quite difficult. And if you've got parents working at home as well, that becomes even more difficult for the student. So there's the teacher and the student having to do this juggling act. And that again can take time out of the lesson. And then, as I say, there's a lack of support. You know, how do we know how to use these things? I think a lot of teachers feel they've been just chucked in the deep end and expected to get on with it. But, you know, not only are you trying to deliver the curriculum in a different way, but you're trying to learn the new tools as well. And, you know, we need space to be able to do this. Otherwise, we run round in circles, we don't do a very good job, and we all fall over. But one of the main underlying areas of this is trust, that if the online learning or the blended learning is going to work, then we need to believe that it is going to work. And I was kind of looking at this dilemma, you know, which comes first? Is it the engagement of learning, or is it the trust that the learning will happen? And I came across something called Swift Trust, which was actually interestingly developed back in the mid-1990s. And it was then talking about virtual teams. And I was thinking, wow, this is a bit like the virtual learning that we're doing at the moment. And it's a technique which is basically there when there's no time to build up all those niceties and those personal interactions that you might have if you were just delivering a synchronous lecture. So the whole idea of this is that it's based on the assumption that everybody is going to be working together and that everything will be trustworthy in terms of the delivery of the lesson. So I think this is important that we start from that very positive premise when we're actually delivering this kind of information. Swift Trust is also based on 4 different areas, which means that the trust will happen even though you can only see people from the head upwards and there isn't much body language going on there. And although you have to smile with your eyes and speak with your tone of voice, you still lose something because the physical side of it isn't there. So they came up with 4 areas which would underpin the trust. So there's the vulnerability. When you're online, you know, you've got to assume that everybody wants that lesson to succeed. There's the uncertainty in that we have to make sure that we are happy that the students will give it a go, that they won't just be so negative that they'll switch off, and that's really important. It's also assuming that the students are going to be happy to ask questions and participate and to take risks and play with things, because we need to be sure that they can do that. And we have to have an expectation that the outcomes of the learning are going to be positive. They are going to gain something from this. So how do we do it? Well, the first thing is that when delivering online, we need to make sure that we establish early communication. Today, this is very much a webinar and it's very much me talking to you. But the idea is that in the courses, we would definitely have interaction right from the very beginning and participation, because that's the way we can all get to know each other and we can see who's prepared to communicate, give them a chance to try out the tools, give them a chance to get familiar so that that barrier is overcome. The next thing is to work on the social atmosphere, and we can do this because we can actually find out that we can maybe have breakout rooms, or we can actually do some modelling, invite participation, and that way again we can model what we want them to do and then get them to do it. So again, it's breaking down the barriers. People want to become engaged with the learning. The other thing that's really important is that if we're in a classroom, we're constantly providing feedback. We're constantly going around, seeing how people are doing, checking how they're getting on with the work. And this is no different when it comes to online delivery. We must build in some kind of feedback on a constant basis so that we can check what's going on. And this is because students will expect that. And if they don't get it, this is when they can switch off. And the other thing is to make sure that people are engaged in the tasks. And this is one of the reasons why I'm actually building in this overnight access, because we actually need that in order to make sure that you also are engaged when you take these courses for infinite learning. So information, in terms of the trust of this, people put information online for all sorts of different reasons. It might be because they're satiring something. I mean, there are so many COVID songs that have been written out there at the moment. It's not true. And it's done as a bit of fun. It's something to lighten the atmosphere. But it can also be done as revenge and hatred. It can also be put up there for a bad reason. The other reason might be because there's a political motive behind it. They want you to believe in something. Or it might be because you belong to a particular group and you want to promote that ideology. It might also be to throw harm and to throw doubt on a business competition. So somebody else who's in a similar game to you, you want to prove that your product is the best and promote your product. But most of all, the reason why malinformation and disinformation and misinformation is out there is because it pays. And one of the things we need to show students is these reasons behind it. This is why it's on there. It's not just a case of spotting it, but understanding the reason why and what we can do about it. And that when we are producing something, that we are mindful of this and don't fall into this trap. Fine, it's fine to satire something or to characterize something, but we need to make it explicit that that's what we're doing and not use it for the wrong type of agenda, because other people may be duped. And this is a lovely little chart that, again, on the course, I'll be delving a bit more into, but it was actually published in Scientific American, and it actually shows the difference between those three main types of misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation, and how much of it is just by mistake, perhaps, or deliberate falseness, but not really intended to do any harm, not intended to be taken seriously, to the other stuff which is deliberately put out there. And this sort of mixture in the middle where people are most vulnerable probably to fall into this. So the other thing to think about is that we've talked about the trust in delivery, we've talked about the trust in the information itself, but how can we actually go through this minefield? How do we get students to understand this? And I think one of the things that we've got in most schools is the opportunity to make more use of the library and the indispensable school librarian. And the other course that I'm running is really to show how the librarians can actually support this kind of learning. And if you're listening to this as a teacher, don't feel that this course isn't for you, because it would be really interesting to get some teacher librarians or teacher ideas on how we move this forward. Because as we've seen, we're all under pressure. We've all taken that digital leap. We need to do this as efficiently as we can. And I think that the school librarian and the library can actually help lessen the load for teaching staff. Because in this course, we're going to look at the strategies. We're going to look at how we can make the library more visible in terms of supporting this. We're going to look at how we can put a plan that's actually going to have impact, and we're going to look at a collection policy. In other words, how can we get the right kind of resources for this new way of learning as well? And how do we make our libraries innovative, again, to support a blended learning approach? The library, you know, it doesn't just have to be the room with the books which you go for reading, you know, into the reading room for. It doesn't have to just be part of a reading scheme. But we can look at different online content. We can look at the different tools. We can help teachers actually get over that hump of just learning the basics. We could put sheets together to show people how to actually do online delivery and presentation. Take that time out of the busy teacher's day. We can also point you in the direction of databases and safe information that's trustworthy, so we can promote this to students and help you to be able to access this from outside the school if necessary. It's also utilising the librarian so that they can give you advice about what might work best, either in a physical or a virtual environment, both for fiction and for non-fiction. They're also a research expert, so they can actually help you to find the trusted information that you need or guide students to that trusted information. So you could bring them on board within a virtual lesson even and invite them to comment and to show certain aspects of how to find out the independent information they might need if they are doing a project-based assignment. It's also the fact that they will know about these subscription databases. They'll be able to tell you which ones are going to be best for which type of inquiry and be able to guide you and your students through that as well. And also, one thing that we've got to be really careful of when we move from the physical to the virtual world is copyright, because it's not the same once we're actually outside the school building. There are certain things that we are not allowed to do, and a very common one is cover images, which actually, you know, should not be promoted outside the school without permission. So again, your librarian would be able to help you with that. And any librarians listening, this, if you're not sure about any of this stuff, then the course that I'm going to be running is going to help you through that so that you're in the right place to advise your teaching colleagues. And also, I think this course shows librarians how they can be much more in terms of what you can create and what you can innovate. And I'm just a real geek at heart, and I've got all sorts of different lovely things that are not just used because they're a gimmick, but are used because they actually have an impact on teaching and learning. So we're going to look at some of those, and this is kind of precursor for one of the courses I want to run next year, hopefully in for real, when we look at game-based learning. So that's it for what I was going to say. I hope that it's inspired some of you out there to think about signing up for one of the courses or both of the courses that I'm running from mid-November. And so now I'm just open to any questions that anybody might have.
Sarah, thank you so much. If I could just step in and invite everybody to please, yes, do share any questions you may have in the chat box. But just to begin by saying a massive thank you. I think you are proof enough itself that librarians are always so much more than just librarians. You've shared with us there a wealth of information, and you know, it's some of those facts are fascinating and frightening in equal measure at the same time. And you know, some of the challenges that you spoke about there. I just last week spoke with two very experienced members of staff from a very well-established school in Dubai, and they both said separately on different occasions, we feel like we are NQTs again. There is so much being asked of us and thrust upon us that's so unknown that we literally do feel like we're an NQT. We've just come out of college and we're starting this profession from scratch. Others I've heard have said we've literally had to learn a new profession over the last few months. And so it is a really, really challenging time for teachers and of course for students as well. And so, you know, I think that's a fascinating area that you've raised, and is not just for librarians. So I know we've got a mix of participants with us today. If you are librarians, hopefully that's information that you will find useful, but also do share that with your colleagues in school, because obviously it goes way, way beyond just the restrictions, if that's the right word, of a library. I certainly really personally found interesting the Swift Trust theory there, because actually having delivered a lot of online myself recently, one of the things you do miss is that collaboration, that feeling in the room that you just get when you're working face to face. And I'm sure as teachers you've experienced that to a degree as well. So some really, really valuable stuff there. So thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm just going to have a look again now and see if there's any questions from anybody. Someone's just put here, 1 second, something about indispensable librarian. Let me just open up, see what I've got here. Thanks, Sarah. Looking forward to the course next week. Is the second course different to the original course that I attended before, the indispensable librarian?
No, I don't think I've run that before. I think I ran a very basic one, which covered doing some development plans and things in it. This course has got some more information on it, and I've tried to gear it a little bit more into the kind of life that we have at the moment. So I'd say there might be a little bit of repetition, but it wouldn't be, there is some new content as well.
I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. Do keep any questions coming in while we're still live. We had over 60 people sign up for today's session, so it's clearly, you know, areas that are of great interest to librarians and teachers and leaders at the moment. If you do think of any questions that, you know, come to you afterwards, please feel free to get in touch, either about the webinars that we've run today, or regarding the courses that are coming up, or indeed any other training that you might wish to look at with Sarah on librarians, or any of the areas we've mentioned today. As I said, we will send you an email after the webinar with a copy of the PowerPoint, and there's also a small survey which we would be grateful if you could just give us some quick feedback on. We'll also in that email send you the direct links to the two courses, so if you're interested, go have a look. They're both confirmed, I'm delighted to say, so we do have places left, and we'd love you to join us if you can. We did have a booking deadline, but since they're confirmed now, you can pretty much book on until the last minute, but try and just get on as soon as you can so you guarantee your place there. Just see another question. I'm attending one with a similar title, so I'm guessing that is completely different. Okay. Kindly share more about the course.
So I was just going to say that the courses are going to be on Zoom, so if anybody's not sure about that, rather than this platform.
The platform, yeah. Kindly share more information about the course plan for the 17th and 18th of November, the library one. That's the one you just covered there. Maybe just give a quick brief overview again, Sarah, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. Let me go see if I can find the yeah, it's this one here. Let me do it. Can you see that?
Yeah.
That shared, yeah. So basically what I'm going to cover is it's going to start really with looking at who we need to interact with within the school, basically as library staff. So who are we actually supporting? And we're going to kind of look at that in terms of maybe how the school's changed because of COVID. So it's going to be much more in terms of what's needed now, as opposed to, you know, last year, basically. And I think that that's something that, though I have covered that in a previous course a couple of years ago, I think that this is going to have changed because we're going to be supporting in different ways. People are going to want different kinds of things from us. And then we're also going to look a little bit about inspection. So again, it's kind of going to be looking at how we can identify those needs and then make them so that we can show if an inspection is due, how we can make those actually visible. Because, you know, if you're working online and virtually, how do they know what you've actually been doing? So we're going to be looking at that and other, things that we can do to get a better score, basically. But we're also going to be looking at library development in terms of how we can impact that on the kind of learning, again, that's going on at the moment. So again, I think our goals and the way in which we develop our plans are going to have changed. And then I really wanted to spend some time, that will be in the second day, of looking at resource collection policies, because this is something which has become much more important recently. They want to see evidence of a policy around what you have in your library. And again, I think the recent COVID pandemic has really changed what we decide to have, because, if physical restrictions are put in place, well, maybe we need to be thinking more in terms of what we can provide in a virtual world. And then I am going to be doing a fair bit on looking at different ideas that are perhaps slightly out of the box in terms of getting your library used, and some fun stuff, basically, and some electronic developments.
Thank you, Sarah. So, Eunice, you've said it will be conducted as a webinar or a Zoom. No, absolutely, it will be a Zoom and very interactive. As Sarah said, this is that's so important. Looking at the Swift Trust, one of those elements absolutely. Was, in fact, we need to get participants, students, teachers, leaders, delegates. They have to be, very much involved and interactive. Otherwise, it's not really a true sense of learning. So, in fact, some of those, or what we actually call, when we're delivering some of our NPQ training protocols, sort of setting the ground rules for how we want to behave when we work in a face-to-face context. We've been doing that, but obviously that is slightly different in an online environment. And I'm really absolutely going to steal some of those slides and use them and start delivering the Middle Leaders Programme next week, because I just think they're really good sort of just pointers for how we need to rethink the approach when we're online, because it is different, and yet you still need some of those protocols, those rules of engagement. They need to be there. So I'm just shamelessly going to steal some of that. Thank you.
I can give you some more to steal, actually, from a webinar I did a few weeks ago.
This is for me, the beauty of information, and sharing it, whilst obviously making sure that it is, trustworthy and from a good source, as you say. Now, let's just see, Eunice, just another one. Oh, great, excellent timings. What did we agree as the timings? I think
it's 1 to 3 in Dubai and 9 to 11 in the UK.
Yeah. So 1 till 3, Eunice.
And then there will be a little exercise to do overnight.
Yes, before the next day's activity.
But okay. It wouldn't take you more than half an hour at most.
So you're in Qatar, and I believe that's the same timing as the UAE at the moment, Eunice. So that shouldn't be a problem. Hopefully that works for you. We'll be delighted to see you there. Any other questions from anyone? Okay, well, thank you all very much for attending today. I hope you found it useful and informative. I certainly have. I wasn't expecting to find out so many interesting facts and figures and theories, but I really have enjoyed it. So thank you, Sarah, and I hope you've enjoyed it, everybody else, as much as I have. So do go and have a look at the courses coming up. We'll send you an email with those links to make that nice and easy for you. If any of you have an interest in primary literacy, we have 3 free webinars coming up on those areas. We've got one on increasing greater depth, inspiring writing, and phonics and spelling and grammar as well, I think. So have a look at our website and you'll see some information on those forthcoming free webinars. Until then, Sarah, thank you very much again.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And
pleasure. And, we hope to see some of you on the courses coming up very soon. Okay, take care, everyone. Good evening. Bye-bye.